Paul Post. I suppose that's satiric too, he thought. What a thing! But his second impulse was more cautious. It did not do to condemn hurriedly. There had been those stripy, streaky creations of Monet's, which had turned out such trumps, and then the stippled school, and Gauguin. Why, even since the Post-Impressionists there had been one or two painters not to be sneezed at. During the 38 years of his connoisseur's life, indeed, he had marked so many movements, seen the tides of taste and technique so ebb and flow, that there was really no telling anything except that there was money to be made out of every change of fashion. This, too, might quite well be a case where one must subdue primordial instinct or lose the market. He got up and stood before the picture, trying hard to see it with the eyes of other people. Above the tomato blobs was what he took to be a sunset, till someone passing said, "He's got the airplanes wonderfully, don't you think?" Below the tomato blobs was a band of white with vertical black stripes, to which he could assign no meaning whatever, till someone else came by murmuring, "What expression he gets with his foreground!" Expression? Of what? Soames went back to his seat. The thing was "rich," as his father would have said, and he wouldn't give a damn for it. Expression? Ah! They were all expressionists now, he had heard, on the Continent. So it was coming here too, was it? He remembered the first wave of influenza in 1887 or 8, hatched in China, so they said. He wondered where this expressionism had been hatched. The thing was a regular disease. He had become conscious of a woman and a youth standing between him and the future town. Their backs were turned, but very suddenly Soames put his catalogue before his face, and drawing his hat forward, gazed through the slit between. No mistaking that back, elegant as ever though the hair above had gone grey. Irene. His divorced wife, Irene. And this, no doubt, was her son, by that fellow Jolyon Forsyte, their boy, 6 months older than his own girl. And mumbling over in his mind the bitter days of his divorce, he rose to get out of sight, but quickly sat down again. She had turned her head to speak to her boy. Her profile was still so youthful that it made her grey hair seem powdery, as if fancy dressed, and her lips were smiling as Soames, first possessor of them, had never seen them smile. Grudgingly he admitted her still beautiful and in figure almost as young as ever. And how that boy smiled back at her! Emotion squeezed Soames's heart. The sight infringed his sense of justice. He grudged her that boy's smile. It went beyond what Fleur gave him, and it was undeserved. Their son might have been his son. Fleur might have been her daughter, if she had kept straight. He lowered his catalogue. If she saw him, all the better. A reminder of her conduct in the presence of her son, who probably knew nothing of it, would be a salutary touch from the finger of that nemesis which surely must soon or late visit her. Then, half conscious that such a thought was extravagant for a Forsyte of his age, Soames took out his watch. Past 4. Fleur was late. She had gone to his niece Imogen Cardigan's, and there they would keep her smoking cigarettes and gossiping and that. He heard the boy laugh and say eagerly, "I say, Mum, is this by one of Auntie June's lame ducks?" "Paul Post, I believe it is, darling." The word produced a little shock in Soames. He had never heard her use it. And then she saw him. His eyes must have had in them something of George Forsyte's sardonic look, for her gloved hand crisped the folds of her frock, her eyebrows rose, her face went stony. She moved on. "It is a caution," said the boy, catching her arm again. Soames stared after them. That boy was good-looking, with a Forsyte chin and eyes deep grey, deep in, but with something sunny, like a glass of old sherry, spilled over him, his smile perhaps, his hair. Better than they deserved, those two. They passed from his view into the next room, and Soames continued to regard the future town, but saw it not. A little smile snarled up his lips. He was despising the vehemence of his own feelings after all these years. Ghosts! And yet, as one grew old, was there anything but what was ghost-like left? Yes, there was Fleur. He fixed his eyes on the entrance. She was due, but she would keep him waiting, of course. And suddenly he became aware of a sort of human breeze. a short, slight form clad in a sea-green jibba with a metal belt, and a fillet binding unruly red-gold hair all streaked with grey. She was talking to the gallery attendants, and something familiar riveted his gaze, in her eyes, her chin, her hair, her spirit, something which suggested a thin Skye terrier just before its dinner. Surely June Forsyte! His cousin June, and coming straight to his recess! She sat down beside him, deep in thought, took out a tablet, and made a pencil note. Soames sat unmoving. A confounded thing, cousinship. "Disgusting," he heard her murmur. Then, as if resenting the presence of an overhearing stranger, she looked at him. The worst had happened. Soames! Soames turned his head a very little. "How are you?" he said. "Haven't seen you for 20 years." "No. Whatever made you come here?" "My sins," said Soames. "What stuff?" "Stuff? Oh yes, of course, it hasn't arrived yet." "It never will," said Soames. "It must be making a dead loss." "Of course it is." "How do you know?" "It's my gallery." Soames sniffed from sheer surprise. "Yours? What on earth makes you run a show like this?" "I don't treat art as if it were grocery." Soames pointed to the future town. "Look at that! Who's going to live in a town like that, or with it on his walls?" June contemplated the picture for a moment. "It's a vision," she said. "The deuce!" There was silence, then June rose. Crazy-looking creature, he thought. "Well," he said, "you'll find your young step-brother here with a woman I used to know. If you take my advice you'll close this exhibition." June looked back at him. "Oh, you Forsyte!" she said, and moved on. About her light fly-away figure, passing so suddenly away, was a look of dangerous decisions. Forsyte? Of course he was a Forsyte, and so was she. But from the time when, as a mere girl, she brought Bosinney into his life to wreck it, he had never hit it off with June, and never would. And here she was, unmarried to this day, owning a gallery! And suddenly it came to Soames how little he knew now of his own family. The old aunts at Timothy's had been dead so many years, there was no clearing house for news. What had they all done in the war? Young Roger's boy had been wounded, St. John Hayman's second son killed. Young Nicholas' eldest had got an OBE, or whatever they gave them. They had all joined up somehow, he believed. That boy of Jolyon's and Irene's, he supposed, had been too young. His own generation, of course, too old, though Giles Hayman had driven a car for the Red Cross, and Jesse Hayman been a special constable. Those Dromios had always been of a sporting type. As for himself, he had given a motor ambulance, read the papers till he was sick of them, passed through much anxiety, bought no clothes, lost 7 pounds in weight. He didn't know what more he could have done at his age. Indeed, thinking it over, it struck him that he and his family had taken this war very differently to that affair with the Boers, which had been supposed to tax all the resources of the Empire. In that old war, of course, his nephew Val Dartie had been wounded, that fellow Jolyon's first son had died of enteric. The Dromios had gone out on horses, and June had been a nurse. But all that had seemed in the nature of a portent, while in this war everybody had done "their bit," so far as he could make out as a matter of course. It seemed to show the growth of something or other, or perhaps the decline of something else. Had the Forsytes become less individual, or more imperial, or less provincial? Or was it simply that one hated Germans? Why didn't Fleur come, so that he could get away? He saw those three return together from the other room and pass back along the far side of the screen. The boy was standing before the Juno now, and suddenly on the other side of her Soames saw—his daughter, with eyebrows raised, as well they might be. He could see her eyes glint sideways at the boy, and the boy look back at her. Then Irene slipped her hand through his arm and drew him on. Soames saw him glancing round, and Fleur looking after them as the three went out. A voice said cheerfully, "Bit thick, isn't it, sir?" The young man who had handed him his handkerchief was again passing. Soames nodded. "I don't know what we're coming to." "Oh, that's all right, sir," answered the young man cheerfully. "They don't either.